Jack Rawlins had grown used to silence. The kind of silence that seeped into your bones, stretched out across endless days, and wrapped itself around your soul like a cold blanket. His ranch, nestled deep in the Texas plains, sprawled over hundreds of acres, yet felt smaller with every passing year. The wind still whispered through the tall grass. The horses still whinnied softly at dusk. But no voices filled the space anymore, just echoes of a life that once was. At 68, Jack's skin was weathered like worn leather, sunburned and lined from years under the open sky. His hands, calloused and strong, still worked with the same discipline that had once made him proud. He fed the animals, mended fences, tended the land. But there was no joy in the routine anymore, only habit. Each day was a mirror of the last. Inside the house, time had paused. The same oil lamp sat on the mantel, the same lace curtains his wife had chosen hung by the window. A black and white photo of her smiled from a cracked frame, while another showed a young boy with a crooked grin and wild eyes, holding a carved wooden horse. His son, Ben. Gone too young. Taken in a truck accident 10 years ago. After his wife passed not long after, Jack stopped opening mail, stopped answering calls. The world outside his ranch didn't matter anymore. He chose the company of silence. Some nights he talked to the stars. Not with words, just thoughts he sent upward, hoping someone might hear. The loneliness didn't scream, it whispered. It settled deep in his chest and made itself at home. It was on one such evening, with the sun melting into the horizon and casting a golden fire across the land, that Jack noticed movement by the fence line. At first he thought it was deer. But as the shapes got closer, he narrowed his eyes and reached for the old rifle leaning by the door. 10 figures approached on foot. Men, women, and children. Their clothes were dusty, their faces weary. Apache, he realized, judging by their features and traditional dress. Jack stepped off his porch slowly, his boots crunching on dry gravel. He didn't raise the rifle, but his grip tightened. The eldest among the group, a man with gray braids and eyes sharp with life, held up a hand in peace. "We don't want trouble," the man said gently. "We've walked a long way. We just need a place to rest. We can work." Jack's jaw tightened. It had been years since someone had stepped foot on his land uninvited. Years since he'd even spoken to another human. He looked into the faces of the children, some barefoot, some clutching satchels that looked barely full. One girl, no older than 7, was limping. The wind tugged at Jack's coat. A strange warmth stirred in his chest. Maybe it was the girl's eyes. Maybe it was the man's voice, humble, unthreatening. Maybe it was the part of him that remembered what it was like to need help and have nowhere to go. He lowered the rifle. "You can stay the night," he muttered. "Food's simple. But warm." The elder nodded with gratitude, his eyes shining. "Thank you. That's more than enough." As Jack turned back toward the house, the child with the limp offered him a carved wooden figure, roughly shaped like a horse. Jack froze. His breath caught. It was almost identical to the ones Ben used to make. He looked down at the girl, who smiled through cracked lips. That night, Jack set out 10 extra plates on his long-forgotten dining table. For the first time in years, his house was filled with voices, soft, tired, but alive. Laughter from the children echoed through the halls. And as Jack sat at the head of the table, something inside him shifted. The silence had finally broken. And it sounded like healing. The sun blazed overhead, casting long, wavering shadows across the parched Texas ground. Jack Rawlins squinted from beneath the brim of his weather-worn hat, sweat tracing slow paths down his temples. He had just finished fixing a broken gate hinge when a strange motion in the distance caught his eye. Movement on the dirt road, unusual for a place that hadn't seen visitors in months. He stepped up onto his porch, shielding his eyes as the figures came into view. Not 1, not 2, but 10. Men, women, and children walking slowly, their clothes dusty and torn, their bodies slouched with fatigue. Jack's heart tensed. Strangers. On his land. In the middle of nowhere. His hand moved instinctively to the rifle leaning against the porch railing. Not raised, just ready. Out here, you didn't take chances? He watched as they approached the fence line, stopping just short of the front gate. Jack counted them again. 10 in all. A few of the children clung to the sides of the women. One young boy held his sister's hand, their eyes scanning the ranch with a mix of fear and hope. Then the eldest among them stepped forward. His face was carved with lines, his gray hair tied into long braids. Despite the obvious weariness in his limbs, he stood tall. His voice, when he spoke, was calm but edged with quiet desperation. "We don't want trouble," the man said, lifting both hands slowly, palms out. "We've been walking for days. No food. No water left. Just need a place to rest, maybe work if you need it." Jack said nothing. His eyes moved from the elder to the rest of the group. Their clothes were traditional but faded, worn thin by sun and time. Their feet looked blistered. One woman carried a bundle that might have been a baby. Another girl leaned heavily on a stick, clearly injured. He could feel the heat rising from the earth, feel the rifle's cold metal against his hand. But more than anything, he felt the quiet beat of his own heart, uncertain, guarded. "You Apache?" he finally asked, the question more out of instinct than malice. The elder nodded once. "Yes." "From the north. We were staying near the border but were forced out. We've kept to ourselves. We're not looking for handouts, just safety for the night." Jack's throat felt tight. His mind flashed back to stories he'd heard growing up, stories full of fear and warnings. But the faces before him now weren't enemies. They were families. They looked worn, not dangerous. Desperate, not threatening. Still, something in him resisted. Years alone had hardened him, made him cautious. But years alone had also made him human again. And in this moment, that part of him, the part that still remembered compassion, whispered louder than the fear. He exhaled slowly, lowering his hand from the rifle. "You can come in," he said, his voice hoarse. "There's a well out back. Barn's got shade. I'll bring water." A silence fell over the group, then soft nods, almost imperceptible, as they moved forward slowly, carefully, as if they couldn't believe what they'd heard. One little boy looked up at Jack and gave a faint smile. Jack didn't return it, but he didn't look away either. As the gate creaked open and the Apache family stepped onto his land, Jack felt a strange weight lift, one he hadn't known he was carrying. The world he'd closed off for so long had just knocked at his door. And, against all odds, he had let it in. The old kitchen glowed dimly under a single flickering oil lamp, casting soft shadows along the faded wallpaper and cracked tile floor. Jack Rawlins moved stiffly between the counter and the wooden table, setting down mismatched bowls filled with beans, and thick slices of cornbread he had warmed over the stove. The smells were humble: salt, smoke, a hint of burnt crust, but to the group huddled around the table, it was a feast. They sat in silence at first. The children watched Jack with wide eyes, unsure if it was truly okay to eat. One of the women nodded gently, and the kids dug in, carefully, as if afraid the food might disappear if they weren't quiet enough. Jack took his seat at the end of the table, watching without speaking. He wasn't used to company. Every scrape of a spoon against the bowl sounded louder than it should have. For years, that table had sat empty. He had eaten alone, lost in thought, more out of habit than hunger. Now it was full, filled with tired faces and grateful hands. The youngest, a boy no older than 6, sat across from Jack. His cheeks were hollow, but his eyes sparkled with something Jack hadn't seen in a long time: curiosity, wonder, maybe even hope. Halfway through the meal, the boy rummaged in the pouch tied to his side. He pulled something out and held it across the table to Jack with small, dirty fingers. A carving. Rough around the edges, clearly handmade. A small wooden horse. Jack stared at it. He didn't move. Didn't speak. Just looked. Time seemed to slow. For a heartbeat, he wasn't in his kitchen surrounded by strangers. He was in the past, kneeling beside his son, Ben, who used to whittle similar horses out of leftover fence posts. They'd line them up on the windowsill, paint them with old barn paint. Jack had saved a few of them, though they were now tucked away in a box he couldn't bear to open. The boy pushed the carving closer. "For you," he said shyly. Jack's throat tightened. He reached out and took it, his hands surprisingly gentle for a man who'd held a rifle earlier that day. He turned the little horse over in his palm. It wasn't perfect. But it was something else. It was familiar. It was human. He swallowed hard, setting the carving down beside his plate. Then, without lifting his eyes, he spoke, quietly, almost to himself. "You can stay, just for a while." The elder sitting nearby gave a slight nod of respect. The others said nothing, but the air in the room shifted. The tension thinned, like fog in morning light. A few of the children smiled as they continued eating. The women relaxed slightly, speaking soft words in their native tongue. For the first time that evening, the silence didn't feel so heavy. Jack sat back in his chair, staring into his bowl. The carved horse remained at the edge of the table, its tiny legs uneven, its head tilted to the side, just like Ben used to make them. And in that quiet room filled with strangers, something fragile and sacred began to grow. Not trust, not yet, but something close. A warmth, flickering like the oil lamp's flame. Something Jack had long believed was gone, the beginning of belonging. Weeks passed, and the land began to change, not in shape, but in spirit. Jack's ranch, once a monument to silence and loss, was now alive with footsteps, voices, and the rhythm of shared purpose. At sunrise, smoke curled from the chimney, not just from Jack's stove, but from the fire the Apache women built near the barn where they cooked fried bread and stew. The men had taken to the fences, straightening warped posts and rewiring sagging lines. The old barn, half collapsed before they arrived, was now upright again, its roof patched with care, its walls strengthened by hands that knew labor and carried respect for the earth. Jack had never asked them to work. But they had offered, and in return, he found himself showing them things: how to mend a saddle, where the land held hidden water, which cattle needed gentler hands. The exchange was quiet, mutual, and slowly built something neither of them had expected. He watched the children most of all. They had bloomed faster than the mesquite trees in spring. The girl who once limped now ran across the fields with bare feet. The shy boy who had carved him the horse stuck close to his side most mornings, eyes bright, hungry to learn. They fed the chickens, brushed the horses, even raced each other through the hayfields. And then there were the evenings. One particular twilight, the sky painted in streaks of rose and gold, Jack saddled his old mare and called to the children. "You ever ride before?" he asked, trying to hide the smile pulling at the corners of his mouth. They shook their heads, wide-eyed and unsure. "Well," he said, patting the saddle, "let's fix that." One by one, he lifted them up, steadying their small frames as they found balance in the stirrups. The mare, calm and patient, walked slow circles around the field as the kids squealed with joy. Jack jogged beside them, holding the reins and laughing, actually laughing, as each child took a turn. Their voices rose into the open air, loud and free. Laughter, genuine and unfiltered, echoed across the ranch for the first time in years. It bounced off the fences, slipped into the hills, and filled the hollowness that had once made the place feel like a grave. The Apache women stood watching, smiling softly. The elder, quiet as always, leaned against the gate and nodded in approval. He didn't say anything. He didn't need to. Jack looked up as the last child slid off the horse and ran to join the others. For a moment, he just stood there, taking it in, the joy, the motion, the sheer aliveness of it all. This land, once soaked in grief, now held something new. Something sacred. It wasn't just a ranch anymore. It was a home. And for the first time in over a decade, Jack felt like he belonged to something again, not the land, not the past, but the present. A living, breathing present where sorrow had softened into connection. He didn't say it out loud, but in his heart he whispered it like a prayer. "They saved me more than I saved them." The fire crackled gently under the open Texas sky, casting golden light on faces lined with stories, survival, and now, something softer. Around the campfire sat the Apache families, their silhouettes glowing beneath a canopy of stars. The air was still, warm, and thick with something unspoken but deeply felt. Jack sat among them, a little stiff in his chair but quiet, listening. The children had finished singing a traditional lullaby moments ago, their voices blending with the wind like a blessing. The women were passing roasted corn and smoked rabbit, and every so often, laughter bubbled up, easy and free. Jack accepted a bowl with a nod and a quiet thank you. He was still learning their words, but he didn't need language to understand the meaning behind every gesture. These weren't just guests anymore. They were family. As the fire dimmed into a low, orange glow, the elder rose. His braided hair shimmered silver beneath the starlight. In his hands he held something wrapped in care. A bundle of hand-woven cloth. The group grew silent. Even the flames seemed to hush. He stepped toward Jack and knelt slowly before him, laying the bundle across his lap. It was a blanket, crafted with symbols Jack didn't yet understand, but somehow recognized in his soul. Deep reds, earth tones, and a pattern that told of journey, hardship, and homecoming. "You gave us a home when we had none," the elder said, his voice steady but thick with emotion. "Food when our bellies were empty. Kindness when we expected only fear." Jack swallowed hard, the words catching something deep inside him. The elder placed a hand on Jack's shoulder and continued, "You are no longer just a man of this land. You are one of us." For a moment, Jack said nothing. His hands trembled slightly as he ran his fingers along the edge of the blanket, feeling every thread, every hour someone had poured into it. His eyes welled with tears he didn't try to hide. He had forgotten what it felt like to be seen. Not as a rancher, not as a broken man, but as someone who mattered. No one clapped. No one needed to. The silence was fuller than any applause could have been. He looked up at the stars, blinking through tears, and something in him finally let go, the years of grief, the hardened shell of loneliness, the silence that had been his only companion. It drifted up into the night sky, carried by firelight and gratitude. "I reckon," he said quietly, his voice cracking, "I needed this more than you'll ever know." The elder smiled. A few of the children leaned their heads on Jack's arms, and he didn't pull away. Instead, he draped the blanket over all of them and sat back, surrounded by warmth that had nothing to do with fire. Above them, the stars shimmered like witnesses. And below, around that quiet, glowing fire, peace had finally found its place, in the heart of a man who once thought he had lost everything, and now realized he had gained more than he ever dreamed possible.